Good afternoon, good morning. Mark Johnson from Loyalty 360. Hope everyone's happy, safe, and well today. Welcome back to our Loyalty Live series. As you know, we have a mini series this month on some of the trends that we saw coming early in 2021. The Loyalty Live series is where we talk to the leaders in customer channel and brand loyalty about the technology trends, best practices they are seeing in the industry. Obviously, we're very focused on helping brands drive unique experiences, drive engagement, but most importantly, customer loyalty. And today we have the pleasure of speaking with Guy Cierzan, who's the managing partner at ICF Next. Guy, how are you today?
I'm well, Mark. Thanks for having me join the conversation today.
Okay, absolutely. Glad to take the time to talk to us today. Over the past year, a lot of changes, as you know, collectively we've been through a ton. What are you seeing as some of the changes that have come over the last year in customers and how they're behaving differently and how they're changing?
It's a good question, Mark. And from our perspective, we've really seen a pretty seismic change, and that's to be expected, I think, when you think about all that has come from the pandemic and the various impacts. But really, the seismic changes we've seen have been both with what consumers are buying and how they're buying. And so if you think about naturally the way in which consumers focus their spending, there's the day in and day out essentials, and then there's the things that they typically would do for entertainment or for travel or more experiential things. With a number of those being impacted, certainly by the pandemic and some of the realities of that, we certainly saw a shift away from some of those experientials, whether it's going to sporting events or doing some of the more exotic travels that one might, and more investments into things in and around the home, things that were easier to do, in smaller groups. Certainly the bicycle industry, automotive industry, repairing and working on your collectible car. There's just a lot of things that actually have seen a benefit in an interesting way on the buying side for consumers. And that is coming from a shift away from travel, away from some of those sporting and entertainment. And then how people go about buying. Certainly there's been an embrace of almost a frictionless consumerism, if you will. And so recognizing that there was a lot of apprehension, health and safety awareness was up quite a bit. You see just rapid adoption, acceleration into things like, contactless pickup, curbside pickup, being able to have things delivered. Obviously, Amazon's been ever present over the last couple of decades, but the dominance of that, delivery channel with Instacart and so many different forms of it have just rapidly been adopted by so many that, quite frankly, in the past hadn't been doing it. So again, seismic shifts in both what people have been buying, how they're spending their money, and then also how.
Absolutely. And I think, as we mentioned, we did a survey with our partners early this year and looked at some of the top 3 trends, or come up with the top 3 trends. We highlighted that in the first quarter magazine, and we're going to drill down into some of those today. And I think the first one is data integration. As we know, more data than ever before. It's almost kind of a banal topic. Brands know what they need to do, but they are challenged in getting there, should I say. Data is very important. How do you think brands should be looking at it differently, using data not just to meet but to exceed, these expectations of consumers have, especially as they change?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and certainly there's a technical side of data and how it's collected and how it's integrated, and then there's the more strategic side of how do you extract value from that. I think data in and of itself is not where the value comes in. You have to really look at which data that you're collecting and which data you can integrate, which data you can optimize, which of it is truly valuable, and then secondarily, which data is going to be actionable. How can you actually bring that to life in order to form better experiences and create better experiences or better messaging or better interactions? So really, it's technically and strategically thinking about the data, understanding where there's data that is valuable, where there's data that is actionable, and really diving into a fair amount of effort into how do you glean that insight and how do you then extract the value from the data? Because in and of itself, there's a lot of data that just flat out is not going to be that valuable and or not that actionable. So you really need to go through that exercise both technically and strategically.
Okay. And what can brands do to optimize the data they are collecting? Because we know how important it is for real-time, relevant interactions with consumers, because it's a big part of the personalization efforts that we're seeing and hearing. What can they do to optimize the data collection efforts?
Yeah, I think the optimization is key, and I'm glad that you are talking about that, and we're talking about that today. I'm glad that brands are thinking about that because first and foremost, again, I think is that exercise to kind of parse through and understand the data that's valuable and actionable versus the data that is not. If it is valuable and actionable, I think brands can work to optimize it to gather a deeper and richer understanding of what the data is saying. And a lot of the optimization is looking at the data and understanding not just what is happening, but why. And then using that understanding of the what and the why ultimately to drive forward a more, a stronger point of effective use of that data and effective ability to ultimately differentiate, create that more personalized and tailored experience, message, interaction, relationship with the consumer.
Absolutely. We feel, I think you probably feel as well, customer loyalty has never been as important as it is today. With the challenge between Facebook and Apple, and even McKinsey recently said that they only think that 10% of customers are going to be identifiable in 2 or 3 years. It's definitely going that way. At least we feel. Customer loyalty. Obviously, you do a lot of great work, have a lot of great brands that you work with, and really driving their programs to kind of unique levels. But we feel that customer loyalty is kind of at a rebirth, and the focus is amazing. But zero-party data, that declared data, is something that brands should be leveraging with their efforts, right? With surveys and kind of understanding what they have an interest in should be front and center, correct? So how should they be looking at zero-party and declared data?
So I think it's important for brands if zero party and or declared data is not on a brand's radar, I'd suggest that it fast should be. This is data that you can get directly from the customers. That as you build trust and a dialogue, you're able to understand your individual customer at a much deeper level than simply looking at what we can observe or the behaviors that sit in some of that more transactional data. So I think first and foremost, brands have to recognize that there is value in that zero party data and the declared data. And then you need to create the trust, if you will, with your customers, with your consumers, that gives them a belief that if they do declare data, if they do open up a window into their world a bit, let you understand them a bit more, that you're going to use it responsibly, that you're going to use it to bring value back to them. And so I think the notion of trust has to be part and parcel to the conversation on not just how to collect zero party or declared data, but then how you go about using it. Trust is very much a bilateral aspect of the customer relationship, and we found it's one of the key drivers in loyalty.
Absolutely. Agility was something that came up in our survey as well. And from going through the pandemic, buying online, picking in the store, or, returns online or in store, just a lot of dynamic changes and shifts that occurred over the last year. So being agile is very important to marketers, but these people are running their customer loyalty programs and are also getting tasked to develop some of these new programs and platforms. So when you look at agility and the past year, that some of the things that have necessitated these nimble responses, how important is it for brands to be both creative in their customer loyalty and customer engagement strategies and nimble, right? And when they're looking to differentiate themselves.
Yeah, I think ultimately both are incredibly important. I think brands being creative in how they think about and approach both the consumers, the data, some of the optimization, how they think about a post-pandemic reality that soon hopefully will be setting in for all of us. Creativity is going to continue to be incredibly important. I think the agility piece of it is fascinating because I'd argue that it became even more apparent, the brands that were able to demonstrate that in the last 12 months, 12 to 15 months, and those that didn't. For those that have embraced this notion of agility and understand that, you need to be adept and nimble, able to pivot, I think it's going to be important for them to continue to have that as part of their playbook. At its heart, agility really implies that we can iterate and then we can improve, that there is this nimble aspect that you've kind of characterized. And I think, it wasn't necessarily, I would argue, as big of a dynamic, perhaps in 2019 and some of the years preceding that. It definitely has become that in the last 12 to 15 months. And I would argue it needs to stay. Brands need to recognize that agility is a good thing. It can work in their favor. And if they don't demonstrate the ability to be nimble and agile, if they don't continue to embrace this notion of how you bring together the creativity and the iterative aspect of what you're doing, you're not going to be able to keep in step with the rapid pace of change that we're all seeing.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's very interesting, very challenging right now for brands too, because one of the things that we continue to see is that, the technology challenges are huge, right? Should we go best in class and get one of the enterprise players, or should we, work with groups like ICF who have a number of offerings that can help me? But getting them to work is very challenging. And what we see, we just released our first industry report, and one of the challenges we see and hear from brands is that technology doesn't work all the time, right? And how do I get it to work? And a lot of times it'll break down after the fact. So when you look at that, how important is it to get that MarTech stack right, to get the technology working in a manner that can really drive engagement, but in a seamless manner?
Yeah, that's something, Mark, that I'm very passionate about. Definitely, it's critically important, but we always would make the argument that it's important for the brand to land their strategy first.
Yeah.
And then backfill, if you will, or then look at what are the enabling technologies, what in my MarTech stack can bring to life that strategy. What we don't advocate for, and even though we've got great technology and a lot of companies have different technologies that do some fabulous things, we don't advocate for brands to go out and buy a bunch of different technologies and then figure out, okay, with these technologies I have, what kind of strategies can I embark upon? How do I actually execute and drive my business forward? So, our advice and our counsel is MarTech stack, thinking about how you bring this all together technically, allowing that data to flow both as you collect it and observe it, and then also how you want to leverage it and create, again, back to your consumer, those experiences, those interactions at those touch points. It's all critically important, but you have to land your strategy first. And so we would just say sequentially, make sure you have a good grounding and foundation of strategy. And then critically important, look at the MarTech stack, look at the enabling technologies.
Interesting. So when you look at that, and that is a huge challenge. And a lot of times we see, especially from our member base, we have meetings on a weekly basis to talk about different technologies. We actually have one coming up this Friday. But a lot of times they'll get this technology implemented, but then it doesn't work. So they have to go out to respective agencies like yourself to help fix it, right? Is that something you see a lot? They have technologies, they're in a long-term agreement or a contract with them, and it doesn't work, right? And they don't have the strategy teams that they need, and they don't. The brand doesn't understand who they are, what they want to be, or what their focus should be from a customer loyalty perspective. The technology won't necessarily fix that, correct?
That's absolutely correct, and I think for us from a tech standpoint, we do oftentimes see that a certain technology part of the MarTech system has been invested in. That decision could have been made, fully from a technical lens, or maybe it's a business owner that has grabbed some new technology that they were hoping was going to be a silver bullet. We oftentimes get called in to kind of think about and help work effectively with a brand on, now that I have it and I'm suboptimally leveraging my investment in it, what do I do? How do I get to a better position? How do I better leverage it? And I think it's a critically important role for companies like ICF Next to be able to come in, provide that advice and counsel. Because we know that, as much as I say passionately, land your strategy and have that strong strategic foundation, and then invest in your MarTech, invest in your enabling technologies. We know that that's not fully the reality. Not everyone is going to do that, or some have inherited technologies, and to your point, some multi-year contracts. And so for us, the secret sauce then is, how can we actually iterate? We talked a little bit about agility a few minutes ago. How do we continue to iterate and optimize based on some of those investments that have already been made?
Absolutely. As we talked about earlier, customer loyalty is probably more important than ever before. Where do you see customer loyalty going, and how important do you think it's going to be or should be from a kind of a marketer playbook perspective?
So, first and foremost, I think loyalty has proven several times over the last few decades, whether it was post 9/11, whether it was post financial crisis in 08, 09, obviously most recently with the pandemic, it has proven to be a very resilient and highly valuable asset, strategic asset for the enterprise. And part of that is it typically has a huge subset of your customer base that is among your most engaged, loyal, strongest advocates from a brand standpoint. These are the kinds of folks that tend to be within the loyalty construct. And so we do think loyalty continues to play an incredibly important role. More importantly, where it's going, and a lot of this has accelerated just tremendously. So things maybe we expected to maybe take another 5 to 10 years to continue to see the traction and the adoption that we would have hoped for. It's accelerated tremendously, and it's happened in the last 10, 12, 15 months. Things like the adoption of frictionless types of technology, the embracing of the frictionless, friction-free user experience, and really understanding that expectation from consumers is that removing the friction and making it very easy to interact with a brand. I want to see that in the digital realm. I want to see that in the physical realm. I want to see it omni-channel, and that's my expectation. And so I think, for us, we continue to see that loyalty gets more and more experiential, but that experience is more and more enabled by technology.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And personalization was that last trend that we saw coming out of the survey we did. And we know how important it is. Brands know what they need to do or what they should do. They don't necessarily know how to get there all the time. Hyper-personalization is this new topic we're hearing more and more about, kind of a new level of personalization. What does hyper-personalization mean to you and ICF?
So I think hyper-personalization is a term that you do hear quite a bit. And Whether it's the perfect term or not, I think it's a good term. I think really for us, what it means is bringing the true depth and breadth of what is possible relative to personalization, but applying some rationalization of that. Like we don't need to personalize beyond the point of it actually making a difference with what we're trying to do with our consumer. So we certainly want to be well beyond personalization as, an email that simply includes your name. That's one level of personalization. Hyper-personalization is again taking all that we know about a consumer, bringing that into the one-to-one communication and experience and interaction that we're creating, but also understanding that there's a point at which you've already achieved all you need to from a personalization point. So I think there's going to be some testing and optimization that invariably brands are going to have to do to find out how they want to define what hyper-personalization means and where it truly returns on the investment. Because anytime you're bringing that level of sophistication and sometimes complexity into your interactions with customers, inherently you can create, unintended consequences, pitfalls, unintended costs that may not return the proper yield. So we think hyper-personalization is important. We think it's important for brands to define that relevant to their interactions and what they're trying to accomplish with their consumers.
Absolutely. And the last question I have around personalization is it is very important. It takes the right data. It's challenging because there's investment that's required with it. How should brands look at tracking and measuring, especially from an ROI perspective, right? You're going to have increased engagement, increased purchasing, but getting it right, make sure technology. How should they look at leveraging hyper-personalization, but also measuring it from a efficiency and efficacy perspective?
I think that's critically important. I think similar to what we were just talking about, the personalization could be taken to a level beyond which your measurement would show that there's additional value being created. And so I think brands do need to create different test versus control and different measurement constructs that allow them to understand, to the degree that we are going down this path and embracing this notion of hyper-personalization, to what degree is it actually increasing our ability to drive a behavior, a desired behavior, a different behavior? And to what degree is that incrementally happening versus if in isolation we took away some of the personalization? So I think there's a lot of almost champion challenger testing that has to happen with the realm of personalization, with some very sound measurement tied to it, so that you truly can understand, to what degree is this actually giving a level of impact and a result that sits well with what the investment is or what the complexity and the sophistication is required. So from our standpoint, measurement is key. I think ICF Next, we fortunately have a team of very strong-minded analytics and measurement professionals. I know that a lot of brands have that in-house as well. And so I think for brands, it's important to leverage the assets you have. Where you need additional help and support, you certainly can tap into companies like ICF Next and others in the space that have that ability. But definitely bring that measurement, trust that measurement, and ensure that you are understanding where incremental value is being created and where it's not. That ultimately should form where you go with it.
I think you're absolutely right. Getting to incrementality, being able to measure that and prove that is very important if you're going to sustain it, for sure. And the last question I have for you: what are some other emerging trends that brands should focus on for the remainder of 2021? Hopefully we continue to see this robust post-pandemic recovery. What trends do you see, technologies, best practices that will be pivotal for marketers throughout 2021 and beyond?
You know, an interesting couple of things that we're looking at, or trends that we're looking at. And some of this is coming out of the pandemic period. I think some of it is coming out of our hyper-political in the States and maybe even globally, some of the hyper-political aspects of life. We're really looking at the dimensions of trust and shared values. And so what's fascinating from a trend standpoint is, more than ever before, I think that trust that can be built, created, fostered between brand and consumer, it's critically important in this era where trust in other entities, is eroding fast. Information isn't always trusted at first blush. I think it's going to be critically important for brands with their consumers to continue to reinforce that the information, the relationship, the way in which they use customer information, bring value, protect data, all those things inherently between brand and consumer are going to be critically important for reinforcing and building on that notion of trust. Shared values is fascinating because I think some brands are starting to be more out there with what their values are, and maybe even encroaching into some areas that we wouldn't have expected a few years ago. I think what's critically important there is that brands, embrace obviously values that reflect and align with what they stand for as a brand, but also understanding the corresponding potential financial ramifications or impacts of that. And so, I thought it was brilliant a few years ago, as an example, when REI decided to be among the first to not have a Black Friday event and to allow instead their employees to enjoy the outdoors. Very on brand. It's a shared value with a lot of their consumers. To me, that's a brilliant example of a shared value that a brand has with its customers that they were able to bring to life and amplify in a very positive way. So I'd like to believe there's probably going to be more and more of that trend. Invariably you're going to see some brands maybe go out on a limb and potentially get in some more problematic areas, but that REI example to me is a brand that's done it very well.
Absolutely. Well, Guy, as always, it's great talking to you about what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Continue to keep up the great work at ICF, and look forward to talking to you again later in the year.
Mark, it's a pleasure. Looking forward to connecting later in the year. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and join us back on Friday. And thank you for all you do for customer loyalty to everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.